to inform you about the GCCS. India is going to organize the 5th Global Conference on Cyberspace, which is scheduled on 23rd and 24th of November. And Honorable Prime Minister of India is going to launch this program. And I'm thankful that many of the past participants have joined. And now today's speaker is Prashant Gupta. He's a principal engineer from Unisys organization, and he's having quite a number of years of experience in handling cybersecurity issues and cybersecurity solutions. He also have an experience on latest currencies also. So now I'll hand it over to Prashant. Prashant, please take over, and now you can start the session, please.
Yeah, thanks, Raushil. So good afternoon, good evening to all the participants here. I'll just go a little unconventional in the way presentations are generally done. And I'm going to share my screen, which actually is a mind map. Okay, why I said it is not conventional is because I'm not using a standard PowerPoint presentation, right? So yeah, this is a very, very intense topic. I actually thought that, okay, I will need a couple of days to prepare, but now I think there is it's an extremely deep topic. There is a lot has been done across the world and also in India. And I'm going to touch base, probably the tip of that iceberg, what we call as Cyber4Diplomacy, right? So basically, I'll be touching base with some of those technologies which we have, some of the technology in the industry, right? And I will also touch base upon what is diplomacy in our understanding from a citizen point of view, right? I'll also touch base with information technology age and how this age has transformed various aspects of our life and hence the diplomacy. We will also see how diplomacy at what stage of diplomacies are actually played. There are what other people, other countries are doing, what other agencies are doing, and what we in India are doing with it, right? So yeah, we'll just start with a brief about what is diplomacy in our understanding. So it's as old as human history. It's basically a method of preserving sovereignty, supremacy of any nation or agency, control and influence over the subjects, and that subject can be anything, and ensure economic growth, right? Now, if we go through any of those chapters or any of the subjects related to diplomacy, it is indeed quite deep. I've just scratched the surface here with those concepts, right? And digital diplomacy is basically what we are going to touch upon, which basically addresses the foreign policy issues using internet, right? Some electronic collaboration. We have also seen agents like Facebook and Twitter play into diplomacy, and I saw a term diplomacy to be used in various places, right? These are all again different methods of doing communication, online communication, and influencing the subjects, right? So yeah, little bit about the information age, right? History of information age is quite old, but the way we capture information today is completely different. The whole um, way we have transformed our information age is dependent on how we build the knowledge. And we see that knowledge has become a large part of our economy. This concept of knowledge economy was actually given by Frederick McCulloch in 1962, and there is scores of papers been published around this particular topic, and we see how world has transformed over that. Now, information record, which we see was available pretty much in past, but those were primarily of the form where people were able to create information when there is a socio-political economic events happening, right? And they were largely reactive. Any kind of political event, any kind of socio-economic event which happened in the world became an information. With information age, that is no longer true. We create data just by living a life, right? For example, I'll just give an abstract example here that many of us have Fitbit kind of a fitness band, and they themselves create data. This data is again shared across a various platform, and a large part of this data gets exported to a place where a general public health can be monitored. And that public health data is again a point where diplomacy can influence the way we execute in our day-to-day activities, right? So data has transformed a large part of the way we do diplomacy today, right? And these data are actually coming from various sources. The data is itself getting transformed at source while it is getting transmitted, and then these transformations are again stored. Those stored transformation again results in some more data being created, which are used for various forms of analytics, predictive analytics, pattern matching, and then we come across some more information about the way the whole nation or countries or community or organizations are working, functioning, interacting, all of that, right? So yeah, that's pretty much about. There are more things I have captured about the whole data space, but I think that's pretty much good information, good introduction about how we have transformed with our information age, right? Um, these data actually are used on various sources, and these sources or these agencies again use those data to generate more data and outcomes with those data, right? The affected areas are again pretty huge. If we just have a look to, I have just categorized a small space in that. There are more to this than what meets the eye or whatever is there in this particular mind map, right? So yeah, I'll just touch base with what is the cyber diplomacy which we have for the topic for which we have assembled here today, right? So if we see, the cyber diplomacy has far more outreach than what conventional diplomacy had, right? Conventional diplomacy had very well established channels in which people had interactions with the subjects, and the rules of interactions were also pretty much set. These rules have become much more broader, complex, and outreach has also increased multiple fold when we talk about cyberspace, right? And yeah, they are actually, if we see these diplomacy affect various areas, and those categories if you go to Wikipedia and search for diplomacy, you will get at least 25 to 30 different types of diplomacy, and pretty much all of them are influenced by cyberspace. And this information age has actually touched upon and made every piece of those diplomacy far more complex and far more involved than what it was before. So pre-information age, that's what I talked about, that it was very much limited, and it was very well established, and it affected both resident and non-resident citizens of any nation or any form of agency, right? But today we have far more deeper reach with the cyber data available, with the cyber enablement of diplomacy. Yeah, so there's a huge amount of data, and this cyber area actually has resulted in a lot of changes into the way we interact, right? If we see from behavior perspective, We have influenced a lot of behavior in the way we are actually looking after data which is required for diplomacy. We have actually enabled many things which are like IP protection, intelligence property protections. We have enhanced our surveillance, espionage protection, counter propaganda, and I'll give some examples of these as well. Citizen safety, both in resident safe and external citizens. And there are some information about how some of the tools or some tools used on the cyberspace were actually hampering citizen safety. And I've just called out Pokemon Go. And we heard a lot of news about how Pokemon Go affected individual citizens. We also have many cases in India about blue whale, and there are many more, right? So in cyberspace, this is also there is a scope for sanction, and but we have got only one single instance where a cyber sanction was used against a nation, that is North Korea, by US in 2015. That's the only official instance of sanction, but I'm sure there are many more, and people in this particular forum might be more aware than me about what is happening around in terms of diplomacy with cyberspace. I'm sure there is more to this. Now, in the cyberspace, there were unrestricted access of data. And I think pretty much we don't talk about these now. We are always talking about places where data access is restricted, where some form of encryption, some form of login and authentication is done before you can actually get to data. There is also one form of web which is called deep web. This deep web is said to be roughly 6 to 7 times more bigger than the normal web which we see. And a large part of that deep web is unrestricted, contains a lot of data, and yeah, of course, it is not very safe to actually go and access deep web. It's probably a topic for some other time, right? In the restricted cyberspace, we have many places where we see effect of diplomacy over with the cyberspace, and we see that governance of in various forms for both residents and non-resident citizens are actually done through cyberspace. That is again a form of or it generates data for diplomacy around the world for individual nations to work with. For example, we have Ministry of External Affairs, which actually takes care of non-resident citizens, and in India we have Home Ministry and Finance Ministry, who takes care of various aspects of resident citizens. The security aspects of cyber diplomacy has far more implications, which implications are related to how we secure and operate with our networks in terms of communication, in terms of any kind of operations which we do into the country or any other organization. And we always look for a real-time alert if in case any form of challenges appear on the security space of the resources, right? And with those real-time alert, we generate counteraction. And the first agenda would be, of course, to secure leadership's hotspots, as well as any other elements of our interactions, right? And they are all also for safeguarding the economic interest, both in-house as well as overseas, or any other scope we are looking forward for. I have also seen some form of cyber decoy being deployed in various places, so that any challenges or any kind of attack to our cyberspace is actually met or redirected to a place where it doesn't affect our core services. So if somebody that's a form of defense. In network we call it as a honey spots, and those are basically decoys for somebody to for any malicious action to actually be directed into those decoys. Yeah, there are some form of orchestrated diplomacy which would be required time and again. and that can also be done through cyberspace. We have instances of those in the world. Now, offensive form of these we have also talked about I mean, these are all some of the things which we have seen in various Hollywood as well as Bollywood movies. But yeah, of course, I have come across only one movie in which the diplomacy is talked a little more in the positive sense. Most of the time we see people talk about diplomacy where something goes wrong, whereas the whole aspects of diplomacy is the method of actually protecting one's interest on the space or the scope where we are talking about. When it, and of course it is one of the areas where when it functions properly, we all get claps. And when it, if something goes wrong, there is a lot of movies or a lot of talk about in Twitter, Facebook and things like that. All of these are also components of interactions. Those interactions can be also offensive, and I have called out some of these offensive terms which I have seen where people talked about, like cyberstorm. And basically it brings down all the essential services in any country, nation, organization, and those affect the normal operations of government. This is again about technology warfare, and key thing about these technology warfare is to have well preparedness of all our equipments, all our network, all our channels, right? There are various countries, various agencies have got into provide having tie-ups with various other countries, other parties, so that their interest in cyberspace is protected. Like I have called out Russian-China agreement in 2015, which calls out basically to refrain from any unlawful cyber interactions between with their infrastructure between those two countries. US China also have that. In 2016 they signed some of those. In cyber diplomacy, European Union came up with their diplomacy toolkit, and this toolbox basically calls out different methods of identifying any form of malicious access to their network, their cyberspace, and which will also affect their operations. India is not far behind. India has also done a lot of work in this direction. I see many instances of this. For example, I've just put this in this mind map, this infographic about uh, how much or how many of those countries have tie-ups with India. What are the types of these tie-ups? And yeah, this is a lovely infographic which actually lists out a lot of that. There is more to this actually. This mind map takes me to a place where there is an Excel sheet which contains all the agreements done by India, to prepare itself from various form of cyber attacks or anything like that, right? So key thing in this whole space is to have preparedness, because what we think is once if there is any kind of challenge between nations, then most of the time we have seen from First World War or Second World War also, that all form of agreements becomes void, and and then it comes back to only one thing about preparedness, and that becomes our key narrative. I've also seen where cyber diplomacy levels are actually mentioned in some of the pages. I saw this PDF from European Union, and it talks about levels of intensity of diplomacy which can be done through cyberspace. And at each stage, these are the different stages of those diplomacy, and at each stage the parties interact to safeguard their interest onto with the other agencies, right? So that's a very extensive topic about cyber diplomacy. This is still just I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg. 90% is still below the waterline, but yeah, there is a lot of scope of improvement. And as I said, yeah, the future of all of this is to have a preparedness. Now with that preparedness, we get into a era where there is cyber equipment Cold War kind of scenario where it's all about who is prepared with what. There are various agreements I saw between countries where they make sure that whatever equipments are sold into their countries, or if country A is selling equipment to country B, then country B's agencies make sure that all those equipments, all those products which they are selling are protected by the cyber laws, which make sure that no form of malicious access or propaganda is propagated through their equipment, which safeguard the diplomacy aspects of individual countries. We have a long road ahead, long way to go, but yes, not that India is far behind. We have also done a lot of progress into this space, right? So yeah, those are the things which I had today to share with people from the audience. If you have any question, be I'll be ready to take that now, and I'll just collapse this so that it is little more visible, right?
Yeah, Prashant, you can carry on. I think there are about a lot of people watching in YouTube also, so you
Right.
please carry on.
Right. So yeah. So from the diplomacy aspect of there is a lot is to be done. We have seen instances where various countries had diplomatic interactions, and they had agreements. Those agreements have again now transformed into digital agreements to safeguard their interest in various aspects. And those aspects are, as I have discussed, which are related to IP. I'll just open that. Yeah. So ba- basically, they will all protect their interest into various areas. Some of those which I have called out here, and a large part of that is the IP protection, surveillance, espionage, and also propaganda. We have also seen that countries like North Korea was involved in propaganda, and of course, each country again then they have their own mechanism by which those propagandas were actually not propagated into their nations. We see instances where China controls almost all the information which goes into their country. They have almost parallel internet created into their country. And we have also seen that various countries have some of those websites blocked into their cyberspace. For example, YouTube is blocked in Pakistan. We have also seen a large amount of debate happening in the international forum, where people talk about how much of those internet liberties is to be shared by people, because some of those liberty result um, in um, personal attacks. It happens by somebody trolling them over internet, and we have also seen propaganda getting created. We are not far behind. We are also affected by many of those into our internet and cyberspace. But yes, there is checks and balance into our networks to make sure. There was an initiative by government to actually block some of those websites into India. And what I'm aware of is that many of those websites still remain blocked, though I have not tried to access to really know that it has been blocked yet or not. But pretty much we still have a lot of cyberspace completely open for us to access. Those are primarily from the cyberspace perspective. When it comes to deep web, I have not seen any instances where deep web were monitored, or even many people are not aware of deep web's existence. Many of these information which results in some form of influence, or influence which undesirable influence over subjects, are again initially started from deep web, and then it came to the main web. So there is more to this than what has been discussed primarily into internet and cyberspace. There is still a lot of scope for improvement. We have also heard about various instances where some devices were remotely monitored, and we have also seen instances where devices were remotely affected. For example, there was a virus attack which was done in 2017, affecting all the camera, and those camera resulted in access to certain pages which initiated denial of service attack, and a whole lot of cameras were affected all around the world. Considering many places, many of these cyber equipments are installed without even preliminary security being enforced on them. So those are the challenges which any diplomat sees, and he has to control from his purview, his control. He needs those control to really make sure that everything is as they intend it should be, and nothing which affects individual nation or organization, right? So there is a lot more to be done, and we'll keep doing that, right? Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm done with whatever presentation I had. There is, yeah, I just kept it on the surface. There is a lot more to be done in this space. There is a lot more study also is required. I have seen some industry, some universities also doing some form of investigation how these affects us, and also generating analytical data of of these cyber influences on every aspects of our life, right? So
I thanks Prashant. Prashant, I have one question. Like, this cyber for diplomacy is a totally no very no niche. Many people may not know much about it. But I have a specific question: how far the technology is in India is advanced to the extent of matching or the threats or the cyber issues which is prevailing in in the world?
right. So I think in India we have a lot of these technologies, right? We have also employed it in various places, because India is not far behind when it comes to victim of any form of cyber attack. There are instances where our networks were affected. We have also heard about Bark server being affected by some of those attacks. So most of our agencies, I believe, have got protection, enough amount of protection, so that cyber attacks simply don't come and affect us in an undesirable way. But there as we are enhancing our as our people, undesirable people are enhancing their capability to affect us, we have to keep enhancing our capability to protect ourselves and our interest from their interactions, right? So this is a never ending loop. We will have to keep enhancing ourselves. I'll just give an example. A couple of years back, we used to talk about SSL 64-bit. Then we talked about SSL 128-bit. Now we are talking about SSL 256. There are other school of thought which actually think that SSL, which is based on RSA kind of encryption in most of the cyber interactions, are again not very strong in interaction or in safeguarding our information. And many of the softwares are coming up with more hardened encryption mechanisms, right? So these are all the steps which we'll have to keep forward. As and when machines become more and more capable, those capability will provide avenues for even undesirable agents to get that capability to enhance their capability to affect us, and we will have to keep saving ourselves from those interactions. So this is a never ending loop. It will keep happening. We'll have to keep advancing.
Thanks, Prashant. I hope there's a very good session you took on the Cyber4Diplomacy. It was a very informative, whatever you shared, and the way you presented is with mind map is also really new to us, and we
Thank you.
really enjoyed watching the mind map way of taking step by step. So thank you very much, and I'll close the session, and we'll keep interacting. And there is I wish to see you again in a GCCS conference. Thank you
Sure.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your opportunity. Thank you.